Okay. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you may be located. We want to thank you for joining us for this next level webinar titled New Features of SharePoint 2016. This webinar will be presented by one of New Horizons' very own leading instructors, Jason Christie. My name is Brian Duncan, and I will be the MC for the event. What that means is that if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the question box at the bottom right corner. And I will work with Jason to make sure that those questions get answered appropriately, or if we can wait till the end, we'll get them answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar is presented by New Horizons. A little bit about New Horizons. We are the worldwide training provider with flexible learning solutions covering a broad spectrum of topics taught by industry-leading instructors. A few little extra points here about New Horizons, but what you're here for is to listen to Jason. So I will go ahead and pass it over to Jason.
Thank you, Brian. Hello, everybody. My name is Jason Christie. I have been an instructor with New Horizons since 2000. A little bit briefly about myself. I'm what I like to refer to as a learned geek, not an old school geek. I originally went to school to be a middle school English teacher, but since starting with New Horizons, I started with the basics, Windows, Excel, PowerPoint, things like that. And then not long after, I started working with databases. And then when SharePoint first came out, or not long after it came out, I've been working with it since version 2003. That has been one of my primary focuses. So I've worked with SharePoint for a long time. I've watched it grow and evolve, and I really enjoy talking about it. That is my favorite subject to teach. I feel like such a geek when I get excited about cool new features. So that's a little bit about me. Now, what I will talk about today, I'll talk briefly about some of the behind-the-scenes changes. I know just enough about the installation and the configuring of servers to be dangerous. I've done a lot of it, but my primary focus as an instructor is on the front-end usage of SharePoint as a site owner, as an end user, as a site administrator, as even a visitor, etc. So I will focus primarily on the user interface new features, and I'll talk briefly about the future of SharePoint and where it is headed. So some of the behind-the-scenes new features. There is a new cloud hybrid search. Now, without getting too technical, what that essentially means is that your index metadata is unified. It is now stored on your Office 365 index, which results in one single result set instead of two as in the past. So you have a much more unified experience whether you are dealing with your Office 365 or your locally hosted data set info. So again, it's a much more seamless approach if you are doing cloud versus on-premise or somewhere in between. Now, if you are doing on-premise hosting, there is a new role-based server installation. So when you upgrade to SharePoint Server 2016 and you install SharePoint Server, your SharePoint installation is no longer role agnostic. Before, when you install SharePoint, it didn't care what the purpose of that server was. It just knew it was being installed on Server 2013 and now 2016. You now have the new min role feature in which you can choose a server role, and there are some server roles available. Oh gosh, I didn't write those down. It's one moment here. I'll tell you what. I'm gonna cheat here and look at my notes and tell you what the new server roles are. Ah, shoot. Well, there's a whole series of server roles available to you. Data center. Publishing, etc. So there's 5 different roles that you can choose, and based on the role that you choose, it automatically configures the appropriate services based on that chosen role, optimizing the server for the best possible performance. And that's really what it's all about. It has been optimized so that with on-premise and then also with, if you are doing cloud hosting, it's optimized for the best possible performance. Primarily for those of you who are on-prem, there are some improvements to patching. So when you download a patch, there is now a 0 downtime. So it's optimized in such a way so that it only downloads what it needs. It's a much smaller patch, fewer updates in an update, fewer patches in an update. So again, it is smaller and faster. If you choose to use Project Server in the past, it was a rather cumbersome thing to install and configure. And it is now an integrated component of SharePoint Server. If you've ever used it before, Project Server is essentially an instance of SharePoint, but there was a rather cumbersome process of installing SharePoint Server and then binding it to your SharePoint Server. It is now natively part of SharePoint Server. Now, you will still need to configure licensing for Project Server as you did in the past, but the actual installation and configuration of it is so much easier than it was in the past. And I've seen some screenshots of the front end as well, and it is always getting more and more user-friendly. In the earlier versions of Project Server was a little clunky, but it's gotten much, much more user-friendly as the years progress, and it's even better now. So those are just some of the behind-the-scenes changes. And at the end of this session, or at some point, I will make sure that Brian gives you a link to a couple of the Microsoft webinars that today's presentation that I've created for you are based on. So I'll make sure you have some links. So if you want the fine details of what I'm talking about, I will make sure that you have access to those. Now, let's talk about some of the user interface changes. First, one of the improvements is there is improvements to site creation. It is faster, and the actual wizard that you go through is a little bit more intuitive. Now, a lot of the changes that I will be showing you are available technically, but some of them are only available if you are part of part of a special program. So again, just keep that in mind. Some of what I'll be showing you may not yet be available depending on the way you have signed up for Office 365. So there's a new faster creation, there's a new look for document libraries, and there's some changes to the 5,000 item list view threshold. So I'll show you briefly some things regarding those three topics. So what I'm showing you here is really just a screenshot, the new SharePoint page. So when you go to your Office launcher, Office 365 launcher, and then you choose SharePoint, there's a new SharePoint page. It shows each of your SharePoint sites, your frequently visited SharePoint sites, and then down below it will have recommended SharePoint sites. And not only does it show a tile of those SharePoint sites, it shows recent activity in them. So it's a pretty powerful thing here. It allows you to see not only those SharePoint sites, but what's actually going on within them. And then when you create a new site, there's a new site wizard, and it starts with a prompt for team collaboration or publishing content. Now, those are not new things, of course, but the process of doing publishing, as you may know, if you're going to do a publishing site, that is largely a way of doing a company intranet. And in the past, you needed a web developer who knew a lot about Visual Studio and XML to create those sites. You still need that, but it is much more simplified, a much smoother way of creating a publishing site. Now, if you choose team collaboration, which is the vast majority of people who create team sites, when you choose team collaboration, you get another series of more intuitive prompts. You get first prompted. I know this is hard to see, so I'll tell you what this reads here. It first asks you privacy. It asks you if this is going to be a public site or a private site. Of course, the majority of them are private. It then asks you the sensitivity level. Is this a medium, high, or low business impact? And what this does is there are some pre-configured settings that go along with each of these three, but it allows your site administrators to have a much tighter control on who sees what in terms of this site. So if you choose high business impact, it will automatically pre-configure a set of groups and users in those groups to protect all the data that will eventually go into that site. So again, much more intuitive and much more powerful prompts that will allow the site creation process to be more intuitive and faster as well. It is much, much faster to create sites. And I've seen demonstrations of this, whereas in the past it would easily take 45 seconds to a minute and a half to create a site. It now creates it in just a few seconds, 10 or less seconds. You now have a new site up and running. So it's a really powerful new feature. Now, some of the things that I will actually be showing you, if you've opted in to the Office 365's first release program, you will see this prompt across the top of your document libraries. And the prompt is, document libraries are getting a new look, and you click the check it out button and it automatically changes that document library to the new look. Now I will show you how you change it back if your end users are not ready for that new look, but I will spend some time showing you what that new look looks like. So here it is, the old look, and I put old in quotation marks because the fact is Office 365 SharePoint 2013 is already, as of a month ago, before they officially switched over to SharePoint Server 2016 in the cloud, it already had looked more like 2016 than it did even a year ago or two. Because, as you know, when you have SharePoint hosted in the cloud, updates happen automatically. So SharePoint has been slowly morphing a little at a time over the past 3 years. They've just now accelerated a few things as of just a few days ago. May 4th, I believe. Actually, no, mid-March is when it was officially released. May 4th, there was an official launch event from Microsoft, and it's a really great webinar. If you have a couple of hours, it's really good to see the SharePoint team talk about their new product. So here's a brief comparison of the new look and the old look, and some of the other new context. There's a really cool pin to top option, and you can now use the right-click context menu. Now what I'm going to do at this point is bring up a live SharePoint site, and this is a library on our New Horizons instructor site, but just I created the dummy document library just so I can show you some sample files from courseware. So here's the new look of the document library. Now before I get too deep in the details of that new look, what I'd like to show you is this. The new launcher along the top. It's a cleaner look. It's now black instead of blue. The color changes are easy to fix, but the launcher itself is a little bit different, and you will notice that when you click the Office button, the launcher, that what was called Sites is now actually called SharePoint. Okay, so I wanted to point that out. So it's a little bit more intuitive, and again, if you have opted in to the first release program, when you go to SharePoint, it will be quite a bit different as well. Okay, now here is the new look of a document library, and it's much, much cleaner. You'll notice that there is no ribbon. Now when I first saw this, it kind of freaked me out, I'll be honest. I'm so accustomed to that ribbon now that when they took it away, I was kind of concerned that all the features of the ribbon would be gone. But they're all there. Everything you need is still there. You just need a little basic direction. Now the reason they did this is they're trying to create a more seamless look among all of the different components of Office 365, because as you probably know, SharePoint is just one big castle in the kingdom that is Office 365. Now it is kind of the head castle. It's kind of the castle where the king lives, but it is just one component of Office 365. And what they're doing with this new library look is that it looks so much more like OneDrive, which is where a lot of people spend a lot of their time. So here it is, my OneDrive for Business folder, and as you see, the new look for the document library is set up to look and feel very much like your OneDrive for Business. So again, they're trying to create parity, I think is the word I could use there, between SharePoint and OneDrive. And honestly, it's more than just parity. It's consistency across all of the apps of Office 365. So no matter where you are, they are working really hard on creating a much more consistent look across all of the apps. And I'm just kind of going along from SharePoint to my OneDrive for Business to the calendar to tasks. And again, they're just trying to create a more unified look across all of the different apps of Office 365. So let's look at some of what the new look of the document library has to offer. Now first, you'll notice the buttons across the top, new, upload, sync, etc. And sync does still create the local folder, and this is a really powerful thing. It creates a local folder, and this is not at all a new feature, it's just something I like to talk about just because it's so powerful. It creates a local instance of all documents in this library, and then you can simply work in that local instance. Even if you're online, you can continue working in that local instance, and once it detects that you are back online, it synchronizes with anything that has happened new in SharePoint that somebody else has done, and of course anything that you've done locally is synchronized up to SharePoint. And then if there are any conflicts, as soon as it detects that you are online, it will automatically bring up some very user-friendly prompts asking you how to resolve those conflicts. So again, I know I'm not talking about anything new, but I just wanted to point that out. Next, so notice the toolbar as it is right now: new, upload, sync, and alert me. And honestly, these were the buttons that were in the Files tab of the ribbon. And then once you check the box next to a document, what it does is it completely replaces those buttons with, so again, remember the Files tab of the ribbon? You had a series of buttons, many of which were grayed out, and then they were not available until you actually checked the box next to a document. Well, what they've done here is they've basically taken away the boxes that you won't use when you have a box checked and simply replace them with the buttons that you would use when you have a document checked. So it's a much cleaner interface. So when you check the box next to a document, you are then prompted, okay, with options on how to open the document. And I really like this because in earlier versions of SharePoint 2013, you just had to know that when you clicked the Open menu, if you clicked the word Open, that opened the local installation, rather than clicking on the file name that opened the Office Online. Now it makes it much, much more obvious which one you can open it with. It's plain English right there in front of you. You click the word Open, and then you get to choose Open in Online or Open in the local install. Okay. You also get options for sharing. That's not at all anything new. Now, I've heard the webinar that I saw from Microsoft, they are trying to make it much, much more seamless, and this is one of the things that they have promised, even with SharePoint. Whereas up until this point, and still at this point with SharePoint, all you can do is if you share it and you want to get a link, you still can only share it with people who are members of your SharePoint site. So Microsoft is promising a more seamless way of creating links and making them available to people outside your organization. Okay, more to come on that. So get a link, download, delete, pin to top. This is a really cool thing because the fact is, as you know, a document library could have hundreds or even thousands of documents, but inevitably there will be a handful of those documents that are really important to anybody who comes to that site, comes specifically to that library. And of course, inevitably, the documents that are the most important are the ones that are high in the alphabet that you have to page forward several times just to find. So what you can now do is pin select documents to the top. So I'll just pick a couple of them at random. I can pin select documents to the top so that when somebody comes to that library, there they go. They see that library. They see that document pinned to the top. So it's a really powerful tool there. And even if nothing is selected, they still see that document. Okay, and this is a picture from that file. Okay. Something else that's really powerful here. One moment here. And this is the new information panel. When you check the box next to a document, you have the information panel available to you. So the first thing that I noticed when I clicked the Open menu connected to a document, I said, "Hey, where did my preview go? I wanted my preview." That's one of my favorite new features of 2013 was that document preview when you clicked the Open menu. And then when I realized oops, I accidentally clicked on the name of the document. But then when I realized there was this information panel, that is where you get your preview. Okay. And not only did you get your preview, you also get options of actions to quickly and easily fill in your metadata. I'll admit, there were complaints that I had with the interface of 2013, and one of my complaints was how cumbersome the Open menu was. You had to go to the Open menu, to the next Open menu, to Advanced, sometimes 3 levels deep, just to get some of the options that you needed. Now, you have everything you need either in the first level of the context menu or in the information panel. So if you need to quickly and easily modify a value of a metadata column, and this document purpose column is a column, a metadata column that I created. So if I want to quickly and easily get to the value of a metadata column, you can do so from here, quickly and easily switching it. Okay? And notice that it also shows any recent activity. So yes, you can still get to version history, but it shows me most recent activity simply in this document information pane along the right. It also shares me sharing information, and it lets me quickly and easily share it from this information panel. And of course, it gives me additional information about that file. Type, path, its size, etc. And this is powerful just because of course, you want to minimize the impact of your screen real estate on your document libraries. So you choose a handful of columns, but then there are other columns that may be visible, that may be valuable rather, and this information panel can show you additional columns. The open menu connected to a document. It's essentially the same stuff that it was, okay? But there are fewer menus inside of menus inside of menus. So something you'll notice there, and they're all pretty much the same things that were there before. They're just slightly organized. Something else that I really like is everything that you see in the open menu you can now do with a right click. Before, right click was kind of the old school right click. It gave you things, all it gave you was open a new tab and other web browser enabled thing. So now when you right click on a file name, you get essentially the same things that you get from your open menu. So just some of the really cool new features of individual documents. Now a few other things that you might have noticed. Right next to this I to toggle on and off the information panel, which again shows you information based on either the entire document, if nothing is checked, or the selected document. Right next to that, well, nothing can be selected to get this. If you have nothing selected, you have a drop-down list. You have a view options drop-down list. And that's another one of those things that I thought when I first opened the new look of a document library, I thought, how in the world do I get to my views? Because I was waiting to be able to get to the library tab or the breadcrumb trail to switch to my different views. Well, there it is. The view options drop-down list will let you switch views. So these are the views that I have created. It will let you switch from list to grid, and grid is nice, especially if they are image libraries. Okay, so the grid will quickly and easily show you images if it's an image library. Okay, and as you'll notice, it's showing you images, select images from the file itself. Okay, so it lets you quickly switch from a list view to a grid view, and quickly switching to view in File Explorer. And it lets you switch to your different views. Now I'm going to go back to a list view and something else that I really like. And this is of course nothing new. You can quickly and easily filter by values of your metadata columns. Okay, that's nothing new at all. But what is new, if you have applied a filter and you realize, well gosh, I'm going to want to quickly and easily direct my end users to this subset of data, because as you know, with SharePoint it creates a paging system with more than 30 documents, and you don't want to have to force your end users to click next, next, next just to find the documents they're looking for. So what they can do is create a view. Now I'm not sharing anything new with you. You've always been able to create views. But what you can now do, based on a manual filter that you have applied, you can then quickly and easily save that current set of filters and sorts as a view. So I simply click Save a View. It creates the view. I can now create a view easily called Sales/Marketing. I click Save, and I now have a view based on what I did, based on a local filter that I applied. And now the view that I just created is available in this drop-down list. So I now have all of my views available to me. I have the view that groups by my metadata columns, again, as well as the other views that are there. Okay. Now, another one of the things that worried me at first, I thought, how do I get the library settings? Well, it's no longer called library settings, but it is the same thing. If you want to get to your old school library settings, at the drop-down list of your new view options is Manage Views, and of course it's more than just Manage Views, and I would suspect that they're going to change the name of that from Manage Views to something else, possibly even Library Settings. That's just a guess. So I click Manage Views, and that does take you to your old library settings. Okay. If I go back to my library, I go back to where I was. Back to the new look of this document library. Another new feature. As you may have heard instructors on SharePoint rant before, while folders are allowed, you can still create them. Okay, they're there. You can create new folders, new documents, new links. You can still create folders. There is a better way of organizing the contents of your libraries, and that is with metadata columns. So I cannot emphasize enough the power of metadata columns. And one of the new features of 2016 is the ease at which you can create a new metadata column. So in 2013, there was the option on the library tab of the ribbon to create a new column. It's now even fewer clicks. Instead of having to go to the ribbon, all you need, and this is very Microsoft Office-y, just like creating a new tab in your browser, just like creating a new worksheet in Excel, you have a little plus sign that you can then use to create a new column, and then of course you get prompted for what type of column you want to create. So I'll create a person column, create a new column called Document Manager. Column is created, and then I can quickly give that column a value by simply selecting that document. I go to the new information panel, wait for it to load, and there it is, my new document manager. Start typing my name, and it will recognize my name in the drop-down list, and there it is. I am now indicated as the document manager. So quick and easy way of creating columns. Now, if you hear complaints, I'm not ready for change yet, from your new Manage Views, which is really just library settings, Advanced Settings. There's a new set of options in Advanced Settings. All the way down to the bottom, List Experience. Okay, here is where you can choose to always make it the default is set by the administrator, or if you just want to go back to the way it was until you can have training on the new library interface, you simply choose Classic Experience. Go back to the root of that library, and it's back to the way it was. And I will point out that while this is essentially the same as was a few months ago, I have already noticed a couple of new features, even with the old new look. I already have this More button that I'm pretty sure was not there just a couple of months ago. So while the new SharePoint 2016, and this is the my company's intranet, my company's specifically the instructor SharePoint site. And we are, of course, having it hosted in the cloud. And something to be aware of, it's technically called SharePoint 2016, but the buzz is they're going to downplay this notion of version 2016, release 1, release 2, etc., .1, .2, .3. They're kind of getting away from the whole calling it what version it is, and it's all just SharePoint. and it progresses, and you add more and more new features. And especially if you're getting it hosted in the cloud, the features just happen. And in most cases, you're quite happy to accept the new features, because in most cases it's such a slow transition that features are added and existing features are modified, and it's so intuitive and useful that you barely even notice that something has changed, because it's all very subtle over time. However, if you could go back in time about 2 years, just the look of a library will have a relatively significant change that you didn't really notice because it happened so slowly. So again, I just wanted to point that out. This is one of the new features, this More button, and really all it's done is it's given you some of the options that before you had to go to the options inside the options to get to. And as I said earlier, that was one of my few complaints about SharePoint, is that it was a little cumbersome to get to the menus inside of the menus. But now with this new More button, it makes it a little bit easier. Another new feature that I'd like to talk about is the list view threshold. Okay, now it's always been there, and it still is. Okay, but what many people do not understand is that the 5,000 item list view threshold, the key word there, it's a list view threshold. It's not necessarily a threshold, a limit on the number of items on the list. However, what many end users and site owners didn't understand is that in order to have more than 5,000 items in your list, you needed to configure indexes for specific columns. And gosh, just understanding and explaining this concept of indexes can be a little tricky for some people. But the fact is, while the limit is still there, SharePoint can now automatically manage your indexes. It's part of advanced settings of a library, so that if you do allow for SharePoint to manage your indexes, and you may still have to tweak a few things, but it does a lot more behind the scenes than it did before, the effective limit now becomes the actual limit, which is essentially 30 million documents or items. Now, you will still take some performance hits depending on how high you are, but it's much less of a performance hit than it ever has been. So there is a new way that you can allow SharePoint to manage your views. And just to make the point here, this is a list, and this is just a dummy long list that I've created. This is a list that has more than 5,000 items in it. And what you may have seen before is if you tried to create a list, and as soon as you added item 5001, you get that rather annoying list. You get that rather annoying message that, sorry, you can't view this list because it's expanded. It's gone beyond the threshold. Now, the threshold is still there, and you will still get, if you go to the List tab to List Settings, you will still get the message across the top. For 5,004 items, the list view threshold is 5,000. There is still the message across the top, but it does not completely cripple you as it has in the past, where as soon as you tried to create that 5,001st item, your list was all but unusable. So you can still get that, but it's much easier to avoid now. It's much easier to allow SharePoint to work its magic behind the scenes, allowing you to do what you do, and that is simply add items to your SharePoint site. Okay, so something else to keep in mind. Now, as far as the future of SharePoint is concerned, they're still going to continue to make updates, and those updates will happen automatically, and your Office 365 will automatically update. If you are allowing SharePoint to be hosted in the cloud, allowing Microsoft to manage it all, it will automatically update for you. Okay. Now, SharePoint is suggesting, and they are recommending, that you go to the cloud as much as possible, but they also understand that people need, and in certain industries, they still need tighter control. They need to own their own stuff. So SharePoint will, of course, always support you if you need to host everything on-prem. But as I said at the beginning of this lesson, it will be smoother. Patches will be faster to download. They will be faster to install. It will be easier to test items. You now have a more hybrid approach. So search, if you use enterprise search, it will be faster and your search results will look cleaner. They will be easier to interpret. And one of the big buzzes is in the past it was always local install first and everything done on the cloud is based on the local install. Now it's kind of reversed. Okay? They're focusing on the cloud first, and then everything that they do for their local installs for the on-premise is based on what works in the cloud. So there's kind of a reversal. Again, not necessarily in how you, those who hosted on-prem, it's not necessarily how you have to do things, but the approach is a little bit different. They're working ever towards efficiency, ever towards making it more accommodating for both those in the cloud and those who host it on-premise. And again, anything that is made available on-premise, to those of you on-premise, has been thoroughly tested in the cloud so that you can be more assured. Now, of course, you will still need to test things in your testing environment before you make them available in your production environment. You will still need to do that. But it has been more thoroughly tested by Microsoft so that you will have to do less testing in your test environment before you then implement those new features in your production environment. All right. That is the set of features that I wanted to cover. So at this point, does anybody have any comments or questions regarding what I've covered, or for that matter, what I haven't covered, anything that you've heard, any buzz that you've heard that you would like to learn more about?
Hey, Jason, yeah, there's a couple questions in the questions box, and I can go ahead and read those off for you.
Sure, please.
The first one says, does SharePoint 2016 have to be used with Office 365? We are still on Office 2010. And there's like a second part of that one, because it says we haven't purchased SharePoint yet, but will be soon. We would like to get 2016, but I want to understand if it will be compatible with Office 2010.
I cannot say with 100% certainty, but I think so. I think so. I believe it needs to be at least Office 2007 in order for you to do SharePoint 2016, I believe. That would be something I could Google, but you can do that just as well as I can. But the answer is I think so. That's the best answer I can give you at this point.
I'm going to back you with that. I'm also pretty sure that as long as you're 2007 or newer, that you can as well. So I'll back you up on that one. So I will Google more and also check with the vendor. Yeah, great. Your vendor would know, absolutely. Your enterprise vendor would know what your agreement would have and what wouldn't work for sure. The other one was, can you show how many image library, or my fault, can you show how image libraries can be managed? Can you show, and then it follows up with, can you show images again? It is why we are going to upgrade. I need a screenshot.
Oh, okay. Specifically of an image library, what I can do real quick is, let me see here. So there are basically two ways of doing images. There's a picture library, and then there is an assets library. And the assets library is great for photos and anything multimedia. And let me see if I have some images I can upload to this library. So these are images that I just uploaded. Now, these images, much like images in Windows 10, they're automatically showing you thumbnails. You can, just like you do in a document library, you can create metadata columns, and you can group those images by those metadata columns. You can also configure all kinds of things. You can group them by date, by geotagging. You can group them by just about anything that you want to. Okay? But this is the default view of a library based on the assets library template. And I think that's one of the first steps, that's one of the first mistakes that people make, is that if they're going to do images, they create the image library based on the regular image library template. The key is to base it on either the picture library or the assets library template, so that you get a more robust default view where it actually shows you thumbnails. And then based on any additional metadata columns that you can create, you can very quickly and easily create additional columns and then have those images appear in the various buckets that will allow you to quickly find the images that are relevant to you. So was this what you wanted to see, or was there a little bit more that you wanted to see?
She said, we have all folders now I am recommending. Janet, can you emphasize a little bit more on what you're looking for?
Now, with folders, I'm not sure if you've heard an instructor rant on folders yet. Folders, as logical as they sound, folders in SharePoint can cause problems for many reasons. One, the URL limit. It's still there, 255. And the fact is, subsites of subsites of subsites, you're already that much deeper, that much closer to the 255. And then folders put you that much deeper. Okay? So folders put you that much closer to the limit, and then as soon as something reaches the limit, anything that is beyond that limit becomes unopenable. Next, and this is really more important, enterprise search does not see the names of a folder. Okay, so if you have an important folder, such as Department X, if you search for Department X, it's not going to see the name of that folder, Department X. It will, however, see the name of a metadata column. Now, I am back in a document library, not an image library. However, with a document library, just like you can with an image library, you can create metadata columns. So with images, just like documents, you can have your images tagged, if you will, with values for your metadata columns, so that when you search the document library, when you search for the value of a metadata column, it will actually find it. Whereas, again, it will not find the value of a folder name. So, for many, many reasons, columns work better than folders. And one more thing. If you wanted to categorize your documents or your images by multiple things, such as first by department, then by geographical location, so HR, IT, sales and marketing, and then Pacific Coast office, East Coast office, Midwest office. If you had folders, you would have to have an HR folder, and then inside the HR folder, you'd have to have a West Coast office folder, Midwest office folder, East Coast office folder. And then inside the IT folder, you'd need West Coast, Midwest, Pacific, inside of sales and marketing, etc. With metadata columns, they can live next to each other. Okay? So I could have HR and Pacific. HR and so it would be a value rather than a hierarchical level of folders. It's now tabular rather than hierarchical with metadata columns. And you can even quickly and easily create groups. I could create one view that groups by document purpose, and then by geographical location, and then another view that groups by geographical location, and then by document purpose, effectively switching what folder it's in with just a couple of clicks. Even though it's not really switching folders, it's effectively having that same look, that same feel. So there I did it. I ranted again on metadata columns. Does that help clarify or confuse things?
I think it helps clarify. She asked if you can show this in an image library, but that's kind of why you're using this, right? Because you don't really have the image library created, so you were just kind of explaining how it can, the document kind of works the same.
You know what? Let me do that same thing. I think I can do it fairly quickly in this image library. So it's a similar look. Let's see here. First, I want a column. I'm going to simplify this and simply accept the default choices. Choice 1, 2, 3, 4. No default value. Then I will edit this view to group by that metadata column, so you can have each document in their little bucket. Ultimately accomplish the same thing. So there it is. Now again, I just took the default values. So there it is, my images, just like my documents, grouped by the metadata column. Again, these metadata column values serving the same effective purpose as my folders. So you have your content organized. And again, I'm just grouping it by this column. You could create any number of columns. So again, department, geographical location, other category that you create based on your needs of your organization. So is this kind of what you're looking for? Another way of organizing your document library?
The answer was perfect, thanks. So I think that was exactly what they were looking for, absolutely.
Good, I'm glad to hear that.
Cool. Yes, everything is, she said yes, everything's in folders. So that's exactly what she was looking for.
Now, one more thing I can show you. Once you make the transition from folders to metadata, now don't abandon your folders immediately. Keep your folders for now, but what I would do is create a view. Create a view, and there's a special setting in a view in the folders section of the definition of a view that tells it to show items without folders. And that basically tells SharePoint to ignore the fact that there are folders. Now it's going to look really ugly at first because especially if you have hundreds of documents, it's all going to be on the root. It will, again, ignore the fact that you have folders. But once you tell it to ignore folders, you'll want to make all views with this setting, no folders. But then instead of folders, you will want to then group by the values of your metadata columns. So create your columns, give them values, and then in your views, tell them to show without folders. Okay, and that will make your transition from folders to metadata columns instead pretty smooth because you will never need to remove them from the folders. You'll just tell SharePoint to ignore them.
Awesome.
And that's for anybody who has folders, whether it's an image library or a document library.
Very cool. She said, yeah, she said they have over 1,000 images in the library when she got there 2 months ago, so she loves this feature.
Good. Very good.
So, awesome. Thanks a lot, Jason. That actually was the end of the question, so I first want to thank everyone for taking time out of their day to hop on this and listen to Jason do a little bit about the new features of SharePoint 2016. I also want to thank Jason for taking time out of his day to present this. I know that I picked up quite a bit. Seems like the people who asked questions got some really good answers to what they were looking for. which makes me assume that everybody else on the webinar did as well. So thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Jason. And if there are any additional questions, please feel free to reply back to the invite for this webinar, and I can get those questions to Jason. And we will be sending out an email here shortly with a access to the recording of the webinar for you to go back and review in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian, for asking me to do this. I had a good time.
Good.
Thank you all very much for attending.
Great. And Janet, yes, I will. Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you, everyone.